please come up, Dr. Hawkins, if you will. It's my pleasure. I'm trying to remember where the camera is pointing. That's all. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Isabel Hawkins. I first heard you speak at the King Tides events at the Exploratorium roughly a year ago, and then later on heard you speak again at another event at the Exploratorium. It was wonderful. Dr. Hawkins was a professional in astronomy, a researcher at Berkeley at the Space Science Lab, I believe, for many years. Has since gone into education, again for several years. It has a planet named after you, if I remember correctly.
I think it's an asteroid.
Let's call it a planet, a really important planet.
Be a minor.
And you had met tiny quote this morning. A tiny quote that you gave at our dinner tonight as we were talking. It was something to the effect of knowing what you are looking at when you're observing the night sky should not be a prerequisite for observing the night sky.
Yes.
I love that. That's really cool. Yeah. So we are absolutely thrilled to have you here. And with that, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you. Well, definitely, I want to thank the San Francisco Amateur Astronomy Society, all the members, all the enthusiasm for astronomy, which is very well represented by some of the stories that were shared here earlier about inspiration of young people, people who are pursuing astronomy careers, but also who are just enjoying the sky and connecting with our oldest teachers, our oldest ancestors, who are the stars. I always think that knowing what you're looking at is like the icing on the cake. You know, the cherry on top is to actually know what you're looking at. But the greatest experience is actually to be able to connect and to appreciate this cosmic order, which is so visible when you make a commitment to relate to it from night to night. I'm involved in a project in Oaxaca, Mexico, in which I'm volunteering to help communities reestablish their relationship with the night sky. And one of the things that I've been very successful in encouraging people to do is to have full moon walks in their ancestral sites. And so basically just to reestablish this comfort level with the sky when it's dark, but yet illuminated by our beautiful moon to such an extent that they go, oh, I don't really need this flashlight. And it is kind of like a new discovery for people. I think that we're so accosted by all the technology and all the screens that cannot get away from us, and we cannot get away from them, that actually reestablishing this connection with the sky and not being afraid of the night is actually something that we can all cultivate and be happy with. So as Jason kindly introduced me, thank you so much, and thank you to the Society for this honor to be here. I want to share with you an experience that I had from 2019 to 2022, in which I was able to visit 3 regions of the world, Polynesia, Mesoamerica, and the Andes regions, to actually connect with original communities and professional communities, both, and try to learn about the cross-cultural connections of the Pleiades star cluster. So first of all, I want to see who has seen the Pleiades in the night sky. Big show of hands. Okay. I am here with the right crowd, shall we say. Yeah, so when I was little, I connected with the Pleiades very much. I'm originally from Argentina, from Córdoba, Argentina. And so the Pleiades are las 7 cabritas, so the 7 she-goats. And so I was able to establish that relationship with the Pleiades early on and really fall in love with the star just by observing them, not knowing what I was looking at. And then when I came to the U.S. to become an astronomer, because that's what I wanted to do, I was actually very fortunate to study the Pleiades as a professional astronomer, measuring the interstellar medium carbon 12 to 13 ratio in the space between us and the Pleiades, using the Pleiades as light candles for me to be able to observe the absorption lines in these molecular clouds. So the Pleiades are very much within part and parcel of my own journey with astronomy, from a very young child all the way to my age. Now I'm, almost going to be 70 pretty soon, so I'm enjoying that. Yeah.
Are they known as the Seven Sisters?
The Seven Sisters, exactly. Seven Sisters, and some people see 9 or acknowledge 9. Other people acknowledge 7. Other people acknowledge 6. Like you may have heard of Subaru, very popular car. Well, Subaru is actually the Pleiades in Japanese, and they acknowledge 6 steps. Now, with barely with my glasses, I can see 6, but some people are still able to see 7. But that is the most common nomenclature of the Pleiades. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. I want to tell you a little bit about this project very briefly, and then we'll just go about the results of it. But basically, the Pleiades Experience was to gather knowledge from 3 indigenous cultures. It was a research program sponsored by Fulbright U.S. Global Scholar. They gave me a fellowship. And so I went to 3 regions of the world, working with Maori and Aotearoa, New Zealand, the Maya of Guatemala in the highlands, and Quechua and Aymara colleagues in Peru. So I did 2-month residencies in each of these 3 countries. The goals were really to cultivate and strengthen and document the indigenous knowledge, identify points of synergy or cross-cultural connections, and then foster youth involvement. And also just to establish a network of indigenous knowledge holders that could continue to share. So speaking of Seven Sisters, when I tried to go and make my website, which was done with the help of my daughter, who created this beautiful image. So they designed this image. This is Mount Diablo, which I can see from my backyard, and the Pleiades is seen from the northern hemisphere. But then the greatest challenge was to find a domain for the website. Go try and find a domain having anything to do with Pleiades. It's taken in every form, Spanish, So I said, okay, how about Greek? So Seven Adelphis is 7 sisters in Greek. So that's what we ended up with. So I invite you to take a look at this website. I do have a full blog of my Fulbright experience in New Zealand, and I'm still working on the others. The pandemic somehow showed up in the middle of all this, but I was fortunate enough to be able to finish the project. So as you know, the Pleiades is a beautiful cluster that's quite unique. There's really nothing like it anywhere in the sky. It is unique for many reasons. One is just its appearance. The others, of course, that it's very near the ecliptic. And so it tends to hide behind the sun at certain times of the year. And then it serves as a calendar. And it is the only, one of the few areas of the sky that are visible from both the southern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere. So the Pleiades are visible from every inhabited continent on the Earth. Not from Antarctica, certain parts of Antarctica, but everywhere else you can actually access the Pleiades. So it is a Messier object, right? The 45th entry in the Messier catalog, because you don't want to confuse it with a potential comet. So that's what the Messier catalog was created for, just to catalog things that might look like comets, so that when Messier was looking at comets, the comets could be found and not be confused with anything else. And so it is a beautiful collection of stars. We can see sometimes 6, 7, 9. It was conjured that, or conjectured that Muhammad could see 12 stars. However, each of us have our own experience in the visibility of the Pleiades, which also has a lot to do with the light pollution. You do need a very nice dark sky to be able to see it. And it is very visible in the night sky, as you know, from October through through March, and then it will actually hide behind the sun, and then reemerge again in a heliacal rise. And a heliacal rise of the Pleiades is quite important scientifically and culturally in all these three regions that I visited. So the cluster, will span about two diameters of the full moon. It is not very bright. You can actually see it and find it a lot better if you squint your eyes and you look at it from the side of your eyes, because you have more sensitivity to faint objects that way. So not trying to look at it directly is best. And of course, if you're in the northern hemisphere, you can use Orion to find it, as you well know. But for those few, the 2 or 3 people here who may not know how to find the Pleiades in the northern hemisphere, here's your guide. So you use the belt of Orion. You go toward Taurus, which is this V, or the Pleiades, which is another open cluster, and then you will see the Pleiades, which technically belong to Taurus. It is kind of the shoulder of the bull. And if you're in the southern hemisphere, you will do it the other way around, because the whole sky is upside down. That's how I grew up with the Pleiades. So to me, Orion wasn't Orion; it was actually a sword. So you can see like the top of the sword, the cross piece of metal, and this is kind of the tip of the sword. So it's called the sword, not Orion. And then you're going to go the other way until you find Taurus, which is now in the shape of a pyramid. And there's the Pleiades, but the little dipper is actually pointing down as opposed to pointing up. So I want to acknowledge my hosts in the 3 countries. I have a professor of economic sustainability at the University of Auckland. She's Maori and Tonga. And we have an anthropologist here in Guatemala, Tomás Barrientos and Rachel Wolfgram. And then a director of the Machu Picchu Museum, and my friend Vicky Galero, who's an archaeologist. So as you can see, I was an astronomer in the midst of this multidisciplinary group of people, which is basically a sure thing when you're working with indigenous scholars about any knowledge of the stars. It will be very integral and very holistic, and it will encompass many different subjects. So for indigenous people in all of these groups, Polynesia, Mesoamerica, and the Andes, the Pleiades really is tightly connected with native food. So you might say, why do I have all of these things? I have freeze-dried potatoes here. I have organic materials that are used to make traditional clothing and other important items for the nourishment of culture, but also to maintain the tradition, but also to continue to understand the biodiversity around their environment. So the Pleiades is truly connected with lifeways on Earth. And that's the one thing that I've learned about indigenous astronomy, is that the stars are never alone. They don't exist in isolation. They're always connected to lifeways on Earth. And that was a big takeaway message for me. So we'll start in New Zealand, which was my first residence. I was in June and July. No, I returned on July 2nd. I remember because it was eclipse. It was total eclipse in Latin America, and I had to do a webcast. it was a crazy thing. So it was May and June when I stayed in New Zealand. And as you can see, I just love this beautiful carving, which is a 90-foot totem. It is the largest carved totem in Polynesia. And on the very top is Kupe, which is the ancestral navigator of the Maori. So Maori came from Tahiti or Hawaii, their ancestral land, to New Zealand, and they were actually the first people to arrive in New Zealand. And so there were expert navigators, and there are many current knowledge holders and astronomers who are curating their traditional knowledge for the future generations. So here's Randy Matamua. I highly recommend this book that he wrote called Matariki. That's how the Maori call the Seven Sisters, or the Pleiades, Matariki. And he wrote this very extensive book based on a manuscript that his great 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 grandfather actually had, that in which he poured all of his knowledge of the stars. And then over here we have Colleen Harris, who's an astrophysicist at the University of Victoria. But so we formed this kind of group of scholars in which we would share knowledge and try and also establish a set of um, understandings that then I could take to the other countries and then come around and share with people. So, for example, in Guatemala, we organized a cultural astronomy congress or conference that involved 13 countries and about 96 people. And many people from New Zealand came, and also, people from Peru came, even though the Peruvian residency hadn't happened yet. So making a global network of scholars was actually very important for this work. So from the perspective of the Maori, the hui hui of Matariki means the group or the coming together of Matariki. They identify, depending on the tribe, everything is very locally relevant when it comes to indigenous cultures. They will develop cultural understandings that are very specific to place. So even in islands like New Zealand, which are relatively small, you still have many iwi or many tribes, and they will have strict protocols that pertain to each one of them. So, for example, for the tribe of Ragi Matamua, they will recognize 9 stars, but for other tribes, it will recognize 7. And there will be other tribes that also bring in other stars, such as Rigel, Huanga, from Orion, to be part of the overall structure of their understanding, how it is that they apply it to their daily living and to prediction of when to plant, when to harvest, when to do ceremonies. And so these, in their perspective, each star has a personality and a role that connects them to some kind of a food sovereignty activity on Earth. And Matariki is both the mother of the other children and the name of the cluster overall. And so, for example, this is like, this star will be connected with the food that grows on the ground. And this star will be connected with food that flies about, like the kereru, which is their traditional pigeon, for example. White tea and white tie is both fresh water and salt water. Ururangi is the star related to the winds. Waipunarangi is the star related to the rains. And then you have 2 others, Hokutuhawa, which is the star that has to do with death and the ancestors. And then Hiraiterangi, which is the wishing star, the star that speaks to future aspirations. So the stars in the Pleiades are very much part and parcel of Maori cosmology and the way in which they conduct their ceremonies and their activities for making sure that their native foods are still cultivated. And I remember that they taught me a song. I'm a very bad singer, but I will sing it for you. They taught me a song so that I can remember the names of the main 7 stars. And so it goes like this. Waiti, waitai, waipunarangi, tupuanuku, tupuarangi, ururangi e, koine, atamariki o matariki, napetu e piatata, iterangi e, napetu e piatata, iterangi e. So it's just a way. So I really appreciated that. It gave me the courage to learn a little bit of Maori. You can always say kia ora, and if you've been to New Zealand, you know that kia ora is a very good way of saying hello and goodbye. But also just it put in perspective how every way in which we can bring learning to the table should be offered to ourselves and to others. So there are many different ways of acquiring and sustaining knowledge, and a lot of times art and music can actually open doors which at times can be closed to others. So one of the main things is that the Tupuanuku, which is the star that is connected with the food on the ground, is um, very much tied to a type of potato called kumara, which was brought to New Zealand via Tahiti, via South America. So it's been traced genetically. And so the sweet potato actually has its origin in South America. And that is the connection with Peru. As a matter of fact, I'll talk a little bit more about potatoes from Peru because they have 5,000 different types of tubers of potatoes in Peru, native potatoes that they curate even today. And there are about 80 different types of kumara in New Zealand. And it's very much a food that is a staple. And so I just went to the grocery store and there it was. Kumara red, $6.99 New Zealand dollars per kilogram. A very good deal. And it's actually delicious. And then I got to go and meet an elder who walked me through one of the traditional gardens for planting kumara. And you can see just how beautiful this is, right? Just how much care and attention and what a personal relationship each farmer has with these mounds to be able to plant the potato. This was, of course, after the harvest because I was there in June. And the kumara is planted when the Pleiades are doing their meridional culmination in November, when it's highest in the sky, crossing the meridian. That's when you will plant the potato, and then you will harvest it when the Pleiades hide behind the sun before they appear again heliacally a couple of months later. So this is William Apuke, who is the curator of this garden. He was the designer of this garden. It's called the Te Parapara Garden in Hamilton in the North Island. And the garden itself has totems of protection. So what's also interesting is that science and the indigenous worldview of the Maori and many other original peoples around the world, science is embedded within a cultural tradition. And sometimes the boundaries between what we as scientists who are trained in the Western fields will recognize as science and what they will recognize as something else. It could be spirituality, it could be some other cultural protocol, it could be a taboo, it could be some kind of a tradition that they do for ceremonial purposes. All of it is just integrated together. And so it's really difficult to tease out what is the science in this practice and what is the holistic notion of this cultural protocol that serves the community. But then I figured that if the community continues to practice this for generation after generation, science is part of it because it's sustaining the community in a healthy way. And so you have to know about the biodiversity of place, you have to know how to predict and time things, you have to know about weather, you have to know holistically how to deal with your food system. Of course, it was much more important before than now, but what's important is to continue those cultural protocols of relationship to place, which to me is a precursor to being truly sustainable on Earth, because it is the separation that has, through technology and all these advances and our reductive way of considering each subject, of course, in depth, and yet we disconnect ourselves to so many other things that are important for maintaining balance, global balance. And so that's what I feel is important to recognize, that indigenous knowledge is very holistic and very connected to place. And so they actually have totems around the garden, which are the protectors, and one of them is called Matariki. So the Pleiades are part and parcel of the cultural protocols of this agricultural practice. So the other thing that I found really fascinating, and it is all contained in this book, if you want to, I would highly recommend it, is that there are sakatauki, which are proverbs. So if you really want to know a culture, know their proverbs, right? It's just like if you want to know our culture, know our idioms. That's really important. And so I just put a few of them here. So, for example, Madrid, the gatherer of people. And sure enough, I mean, they had all sorts of festivals during June. And now Matariki is a national holiday in New Zealand. It's an official holiday. It's the only one related to the stars in modern history that I can think of. But it's definitely a gatherer of people. Also, Matariki appears when Vega flees, hearkening the new year. That's the other thing, is that the Pleiades are always studied and talked about in relationship with other stars. Like I remember that Matariki is married to Rehua, which is Antares. And so I now know exactly where one or the other is. If I see Antares in Scorpio, I know that 180 degrees, that's where the Pleiades is, and vice versa. You see, they're married, they kind of don't like to hang out with each other. At 180 degrees, one's up the other side, and vice versa. This one has to do with that star that Tuporangi, or the star that is connected with the food above. So when Matariki is seen, the fat is heated. So basically, when Matariki comes out and is up in the sky, that's when you catch your pigeons, and when you render the fat, and you store the pigeons to maintain them and to preserve them for the rest of the year. That's it. So it has to do with also lamprey and eels, and it has to do with food supplies that are scooped up. It turns out that the elders would do observations of the cluster with respect to the amount of cirrus in the atmosphere. Yeah.
Does the Matariki holiday have anything to do with the winter solstice?
No, it has to do with the heliacal rise of the Pleiades during a particular lunar phase, which is the Tangaroa phase, or the from the third quarter moon to new moon. So it's a stellar lunar system. And so this is kind of a system of relationships that has to do with Matariki. Your question was just timely. When the sun is about 15 degrees below the horizon, that's when they actually observe the cluster. Hyades, Pleiades, Tautoro, which is Orion, Huanga, which is Rigel, and it has to be done during this particular phase of the moon. And I asked Drangi Matamua that maybe perhaps it had something to do with seeing enough of a horizon through illumination by the moon, so that you can actually measure the number of degrees above the horizon when you make the observation of the clarity of the cluster with respect to the atmosphere cirrus clouds, which is something that the Hawaiians would do to be able to measure the latitude of Hawaii by looking at the Southern Cross. So the distance from the horizon to the first star at the bottom of the Southern Cross has to be equal to the distance between the bottom of the cross and the top of the cross. But for you to be able to see the horizon, you need a bit of moon light. You can't do it without it. And that's why the Southern Cross is the name in Hawaiian, is cared for by the moon. And so it's really fascinating that they would do this system of observation. But it's a holistic thing. It's not just one thing.
What's the implication of that Southern Cross?
It gives you the latitude of Hawaii. So when you see the bottom of the distance between the bottom of the cross and the horizon is equal to the distance between the cross itself, you're at the latitude of Hawaii.
Which is really important when you're out on a small boat in the middle of the
It's very important when you're out in a small boat and you want to know that you're at that latitude, and you turn the trade winds to get you to your islands. Yeah. So the moon is also incredibly important. Like I mentioned, it's a stellar lunar system. And they have another calendar called the Manamataka, which literally means the turning of the moon, in which the moon really guides activities throughout the year that have to do with cultivation and harvesting and planting of many different things, but in particular plants that have to do with weaving or medicine or food. And so I just want to point out one particular plant, which is flax of harakeke, in which I just brought this pew pew, which is a beautiful skirt. I'll pass it around. But this is made of flax, and you can see that there's a bit of the flax surface still there, and others have been taken away, and that's what gets put into the indigo to dye. So this is one of the Maori skirts worn by the men. You probably have seen this when they do the haka, right? Beautiful skirt. Pass it around. So this is made out of flax. And much of the harvesting and planting in New Zealand has to do with the moon and with the stars as well. So another connection with Mandariki that was, I thought, really interesting, and there's a connection with Guatemala as well, as we will see later. It has to do with the appearance of what they call a canoe in the sky. So of course the Maori are expert navigators, and they use this canoe in the sky being the entire um, relationship between the belt of Orion through the Hyades all the way to the Pleiades being the prow of the canoe. And here's kind of a diagram that you can find in this book. But basically, this canoe has a net, and that net is collecting the souls of everyone who has died during that year. So everyone who dies gets their soul collected by the Pleiades going around. And when the Pleiades rise heliacally from behind the sun in June at this particular phase of the moon, the souls of the ancestors are released to become stars. So that is how people deal with their loss in New Zealand. Okay, let's move on over to Peru. So Peru is an amazing place, incredible biodiversity. If you've been to Machu Picchu, which maybe some people here have been to Machu Picchu, yes, a few of you. To me, it's like the tip of the iceberg of everything else that you can see in Peru. There are, ancestral sites that were dedicated to hydrology and water engineering. There are ancestral sites that were dedicated to experiments about different microclimates in which you would grow different types of seeds. It's just an amazing place. Of course, the terracing system, the water management system, very sophisticated. So Machu Picchu is standing there today, not because of what you see above, but literally the engineering that is below to drain the torrential rains that come into that area every year. I want to acknowledge my host, which is this amazing family, a very diverse family of anthropologists, archaeologists, traditional knowledge holders, and it's really fun to hang out with them. Peru, as you know, is home of many different types of potato and tubers. I'm going to pass around freeze-dried potatoes from Peru, Moraya and Chuño. I've had this in my house since 2002. They will last in storage for 20 years, especially this one. 20 years. You soak it in water for a few days, you have potato again. So the Peruvians, the Andean original peoples, invented freeze drying as a process. And I've seen it in action. It's really cool. Won't hurt. Touch it. Won't hurt at all. So what I found really fascinating was that connection between that kumara, that sweet potato from New Zealand, and the many types of tubers of potato in Peru. So here's showing our friends in Tahuahiri, Rosita, Julio, and many of other colleagues who helped us understand their practices who are planting potato. Here's also the family give you one of their hats. So that's one of their hats. Here's some other beautiful hats. I said, what does the Pleiades have to do with hats? Nothing and everything, right? I mean, it's this notion of understanding your environment so that you know how to use different materials like alpaca and llama and many different things. It's important to understand your environment. It's important to time things with the stars, and it's important to understand whether or not you're going to have a bountiful crop or not, depending on what's happening in your weather. And it turns out that the Pleiades can give you information about weather prediction because of its relation to El Nino patterns in the Pacific. It's really fascinating. Here's another elder who also helped us understand the traditional names of the Pleiades and some of the um, uh, festivals that are held in the Andes every year that honor the Pleiades. One of them called Coyuriti, which is a pilgrimage to a glacier. Polka being another name for the Pleiades, which is basically storage, food storage in the sky. And also this elder, which I call my techo astronomo from Toca, Peru. He actually sang a song to the Pleiades and told us about the name being something hearkening to a group or a grouping. So even today, hundreds of Andean communities in Peru and Bolivia make the same observation of the Pleiades as the Maori. And remember, the Maori brought the sweet potato from South America about 2,000 years ago to the Polynesia, to Tahiti, and from there it went to New Zealand. So the potato didn't come by itself. It came with protocols, cultural protocols, scientific protocols, cultivation protocols. And one of the protocols is an observation of the Pleiades, which is shared between the Maori and the Andean original peoples today. And that observation has to do with the clarity of the stars. How many stars do you count during the Hawaiian horizon? So that observation, that how many degrees above the horizon during the Tangaroa phase, so you can measure the extent, the angular extent above the horizon, is really important. And so if they look blurry, it gives you one indicator about weather. If they look clear, it gives you another indicator about weather. And that observation has to be done politely, so right before sunrise. And there has been research that I have not conducted, but I was able to corroborate that it was still being practiced by indigenous elders today, both in Lake Titicaca and in the highlands of the Cusco Valley region. Is that this is what's happening. This is the diagram of what's happening. So when the Pleiades appear halachically in late June, if you see many stars and they're sharp and clear, you're going to have good amount of rain 6 months hence. So this is a weather prediction observation. And then if you see few stars and they're looking blurry, that means that you have a layer of cirrus on top that is preventing you from seeing the stars very clearly. And that is an indicator of an El Nino year, and an El Nino year in the Andes means drought. And so what people can do, even to this day, is actually time the planting of the potato, delaying it or advancing it. And the roots of the potato are very sensitive to early rainfall. If you don't catch it right, you could lose your crop. And so they actually time it based on what they see in the Pleiades. And I interviewed a 90-year-old elder in Lake Titicaca in Aymara with a translator that was his great-grandson, who corroborated this observation. So this is happening today. Okay, let's go to Guatemala, because 3 countries, the fellowship kept me quite busy. I also encourage you to come and look at this beautiful house. They're just so cool and so awesome. And this is just a few of the ones that I was able to bring for you. So how many people have been in Guatemala? Oh yeah. So what are we looking at? Huh? No, close. Which lake? Titlan. Yes, Lake Titlan. So it's a volcanic lake. So I was in the highlands of Guatemala. Here's my amazing family, host family. A lot of fun, a lot of feasts, a lot of connection, a lot of sharing of knowledge, formally and informally. And what I found is that corn, being one of the staples in Mesoamerica, is actually the harvesting of corn, the time of the tapisca, or when they actually collect the dry corn from the field, is when the Pleiades are straight overhead in November. And it's also, here you see people harvesting their corn. And it's also when, because we're now within the tropics, just like Australia, we're definitely within the tropics, when you have the Pleiades above crossing the meridian and you have the sun below in the nadir, is Day of the Dead. So you basically have the sun waking your ancestors, and at the same time you have the Pleiades above telling you that you need to also harvest your corn. So we went to many cemeteries. Here's a celebration of life and death. The family goes to the cemetery and with lots of different flowers, flower arrangements, lots of discussion. You see people laughing, people flying kites, which kind of take messages to the ancestors. It's both a celebratory time, but also a time of reflection, all tied to the Pleiades and to the sun in the underworld. I also found that by interviewing many of the women who are expert weavers, is that both the Pleiades and the Hyades, metaphorically, are connected with essential tools of weaving. And I'm actually convinced that Pleiades, Hyades, and Orion are all a system of weaving in the sky, but I haven't found the piece about Orion, even though it really, Orion to me looks just like a backstrap loom, you know.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, so that's something I need to delve into. But it was kind of a trick. It was a little bit tricky to try and it was tricky to try and ascertain when people were talking about 7 stars. You know, you also very prevalently can see the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, and so to try and ascertain which groups of 7 stars we were talking about, it took a lot of discussion. But one thing that was a certain clue was the connection with the moon, because the Pleiades is near the ecliptic, and the Big Dipper is not. And so when you connect the Pleiades with the moon, you know that you're talking about this cluster that's near the ecliptic. Also, the Ishtar is the Maya deity of the moon, weaving medicine and fertility. And so what the women told me is that this tool, which is a tool for preparing the threads to go in the warp, and they made me a miniature one with a little threading on it. It has these pegs, and these pegs are the Pleiades. And I said, well, how do you know that these are the 7 stars? It says they travel with the moon. And so when the chief said that, I said, okay, that's it.
And that's basically what's happening. You have the Pleiades, the Hyades, and the ecliptic
It's right through the middle. That is the golden gate of the ecliptic, right? And the Hyades is another tool, which is this Y, so it gave me this branch, is the tool that is used to beat the cotton so that you release all the seeds and you soften it before you spin it to make thread. So you have the Pleiades on one side, the moon in the middle, and the Hyades on the other. So these are the two main tools of weaving. And this elder also told us the same thing. So the knowledge came from several language groups, Susukil, Quiche, Mam, and Quechua. And so just kind of to wrap it all together, we held the first Congreso Mesoamericano de Astronomía Cultural, the first Mesoamerican Congress of Cultural Astronomy in Guatemala. We have all these countries represented, and we had a very wonderful local organizing committee that included a multidisciplinary team, archaeologists, archaeoastronomers, traditional Maya calendar keepers, other astronomers, an astrophotographer, Sergio Montúfar, maybe you have heard of him. He's pretty well known astrophotographer, and another astronomer from the University of the Valle of Guatemala. And we organized this Congress to be a week-long experience in which we learned from the academy, we learned from the elders at cultural schools in which the learning was done outdoors. And we learned from the ancestral sites. So this is Copan, but we also were in Semetabak and Takalikabak. So we try to, bring together this notion of what is cultural astronomy. What are the attributes of cultural astronomy? Thriving through the living knowledge, practices of a community, serving the community, anchored on the ancestral knowledge passed generationally. Intimate connection between earth and sky, not one or the other. Very much geocentric or observation-based, multidisciplinary, and then this kind of cycles of relationship to place, reciprocity, self-determination, and peace is what I saw everywhere. And within that cycle was where all the science was actually anchored for the benefit of the community, including the knowledge of the stars. And then Ishkik Pos was our calendar keeper, says, well, you can define it all you want, but we don't need a definition. For us, astronomy is a life way. And so that was another very wonderful point of view that was shared. And you can see her there. There she is, working with her students on doing demonstrations of eclipses and using the tools. Also, we have other elders that we worked with in the Yucatan and bringing telescopes to the ancestral sites where, the most sophisticated set of calendars was created 2,000 years ago. And I'm very proud of this young man who was actually published in the research notices of the American Astronomical Society, work that he did with his elders to recover the constellations of the highlands of Guatemala in his own Quiche language. So that paper is actually available. And his mentor right there, Doña Maria Avila, who's not sitting down, she's standing. Tiny, beautiful woman, 87 years old, still going strong. I do have a digital poster that was presented at the WAS. So you could just probably take a picture of that, or I can share that with you if you want to know more information and see more images. But all I want to say right now is thank you in the many languages that I learned through my journey with the Pleiades. Thank you. So questions, comments? Thank you. Yes.
So, how old are these cultures? Hundreds, thousands of years, and this knowledge to them comes back? How did they do it without telescopes?
Thousands of years. Well, it's amazing what the sky will teach you if you give it a chance, right? So, and there are other instruments. For example, in Mesoamerica, you have these tools called zenith tubes. So these are tubes of to capture light, to capture the zenith passage of the sun within the tropics. So there are these tubes with a parallel observation chamber. You go down and you observe, and you time, right? You start counting, you time the zenith passage of the sun day after day after day after day. So after 4 years of counting, you realize you need an extra day. That's your leap year. Okay, so you don't need a telescope. You need to pay attention. You can pay attention to shadows. You need to pay attention to the motion, cyclical motions of the stars. Cycles of Venus were very well understood, and Venus is a crazy thing. So that's why it's called the shoe star, or the wasp star, because it moves like this in the sky. So all of these descriptions of Venus from the Maya or Mesoamerican perspective were based on actual observations, but it takes time. It takes a long time, and so it's not difficult to know. It just takes time and patience and relationship. And of course, they had experts. I mean, even in their codices, there are acknowledged experts who were astronomers. So the Achim, and as a matter of fact, the Achim of today, which is the calendar keeper, is the expert in astronomy, is the keeper of time, is the person that has the continuous count of the calendar from thousands of years ago, and they still do their ceremonies every 260 days. And that is a continuous count that has not been lost track of. So a lot of it is like oral tradition from generation to generation, but also other tools like writing things down in the codices, doing base 20 mathematics, inventing the zero. I mean, these are just a few of the accomplishments of our ancestors. And it really takes paying attention, being in relationship with your natural environment, and not just relying on tools to think that that's what the only way for us to acquire knowledge. And I think that that's my greatest worry of the future generations, is that there's so much technology, we're so mediated, that we have lost confidence in our own abilities to utilize the most finely attuned instrument of observation, which is your body. Our bodies are the best instrument of observation. So when I take my students out to look at the sky, I never start with a telescope, because that's a killer, right? Everybody goes to the telescope, and then you don't look up. You don't look up, you don't notice the patterns. So yes, bring the tool, but do it in a way that also acknowledges that we have the capacities to understand in our own terms. And that's a gift. That's a gift. So using all of our wonderful things that we have around us, the latest and most automated and most beautiful technologies, as well as ourselves and our capacity to understand patterns, cycles, and to appreciate things in ways that makes us recognize that our food really comes from our understanding of the stars. You know, there are 4% of the world's population is indigenous, and yet they take care of 80% of the world's biodiversity. So the fact that you have your organic greens at your table has a lot to do with the work of original people around the world who still rely on their knowledge of the stars, who still need the dark skies. And we're not even going to mention, you know, the pollinators and the bats and the turtles and everything else, the entire ecology that depends on night sky darkness. So it's all connected. So I think that not having ready tools obviously is not a prerequisite to great accomplishments around the world. And we don't need the aliens to come down and build pyramids for us, right? Thank you for the question.
A little bit along those same lines. Was the knowledge spread across the culture, or was it really residing in that one or two people who were the astronomers?
Like now, you mean? Like when I went to interview? Or
thousands of years ago now? Well,
yeah, I think that expertise has always been appreciated, you know, and also just, you know, there are certain people that would have certain gifts and certain attributes, you know. So I don't think that, you know, everyone would have the same amount of knowledge. On the other hand, I think we have to be able to pass it on from generation to generation, because it took many generations for you to be able to understand the system of relationships and be able to document it and pass it on. But I don't think everybody had the same level of understanding. It was specialized just like it is today. And you still see that specialization. Yeah, but a lot of times it's not just learned, is something that is given to you by your ancestors. So this is kind of more the esoteric part, is the part that I cannot describe it as science in the way that I have been trained. But for example, the calendar keepers, you have to have that gift. Not everyone in the family will just by sitting down with an elder and learning the mechanics of it will become a calendar keeper. That's not how it goes. It's something that you carry through your legacy and will manifest through some event usually the people will get sick. There's some traumatic thing that happens, and there's some recognition or awakening that they start to behave and conduct themselves in the way that the elders recognize, oh, that person will be the next calendar keeper. Something that I'm not very much an expert on is that's as much as I know and I can share with you, but it's not something that you just go to school for, if you know what I mean. Yes.
I wonder if you could go into a little bit more detail about what it means for the Pleiades to have a heliacal rise. You were saying, well, the Pleiades is pretty close to the ecliptic, so it's always kind of going to be ahead, or maybe just a little bit behind the sun, right? And the sun actually passes through the sky, and it's slightly different angles. So, what specifically does it mean for the heliacal rise of the Pleiades?
And so basically, it's going to be a little bit to the right or to the left of the sun. It's not exactly on the ecliptic, but it's near enough so that it'll rise before the sun rises. But it's very much within the same range, and it's only a couple of degrees apart. And so the main thing is that you have to have enough of darkness for you to be able to see them before the sun rises. So that's about 15 degrees. So you have to have 15 degrees separation between where the sun is and where the Pleiades are. You know, so that's basically what defines the heliacal rise. But it depends on many different things. It depends on what's going on in the atmosphere. It depends on your latitude because it depends on the angle that it's going up. So heliacal rise is not cosmic rise. Those are two different things.
Right. Because I'm kind of a heliacal rise geek. And just experientially, you know what season you're going to see it first, and you look for it, and you look for it, and you look for it, and then one morning before sunrise, you see it.
Yeah.
That's the heliacal rise.
Absolutely. It's very much experiential, right? It's because it depends on so many different conditions. Yeah, I basically went to Waikiki Island waiting for the Pleiades to heliacal rise, and I did exactly that. So every morning I would just get up at 5 in the morning and just go over until one time. Like, ah! Yes, that was amazing. So you have to just experience it. It's easier with Sirius. Much easier. So the Egyptians had it easier.
So before you started the travels and this research, did you have set in mind something that you expected to learn, and or not, or are you completely open-minded with open book?
Open book. I mean, I had read this. So New Zealand, you know, Aotearoa, they have a much more documented set of knowledge system for the Pleiades. And yet I felt that it was the most academic compared to Peru and Guatemala, in which it was really the elders from these very isolated original communities who had the knowledge in the oral tradition. And so it was more challenging because I had to get a translator. You know, I speak Spanish. I don't speak Quechua or Mam or, you know, many of the other 30 or so languages, Maya languages in Guatemala. So I had to, you know, find trustworthy translators, I guess, that I knew had very good knowledge of both Spanish and the original language, and that we had established a relationship. So that took more time, but I would say that it was, for example, really surprising to me to find the connection with the weaving. And it was really nice because so far I had been focused so much on food that, you know, it wasn't as much focused on women. And also the other surprise to me was the role of the moon. How inextricable the moon is from understanding the system of the Pleiades, Orion, the Hyades, you know, just because of that golden gate of the ecliptic. And that was something new for me to know how strong that connection with the moon would be. Yeah, and when I put this project together for Fulbright, I mean, I already knew and had been in Guatemala, had done the Living Maya Living Maya Time website for the Smithsonian. I had already worked on that for 2012 for the Maya calendar. So, you know, I had already a set of relationships that had already cultivated. The same thing with Peru. You know, I was much more working with Native Hawaiians on astronomy. I built a website for the Exploratorium called Never Lost, which you can still find, which is both in Native Hawaiian and in English. And again, I had realized how much it's a whole system of relationships between the ocean and the clouds and the weather and the stars and the relationship with the islands and sunset and sunrise time and Hawaii horizons. It's all connected. It's not just, using the stars to navigate. It's just a whole system of interconnected knowledge. And so then I asked my colleagues in Hawaii to put me in contact with their friends and colleagues in New Zealand. And Fulbright is funny. You know, they have all these rules. So for U.S. Global Scholar, you had to have 2 regions. And so I had to, you know, since I had 2 countries in one region, the Americas, I had to go to another region. So I said, okay, look in the map. Oh, Polynesia, great.
So I'm not sure if you discussed this with your colleagues, but I just thought this was actually quite important with the work you're doing. So there's 2 ways to know the sky. There's academia, and then there's actual practical use in life. And if you're an academic and you don't understand these functions, it's easy to dismiss these as superstitious, behavior. And until you've crossed, made this bridge between the two to understand the connection, you bring a whole new type of respect to these cultures who understood this, where we as academics would not, because we have no use practically for the sky. We're just studying academically.
Yeah, and but I think that, of course, you make the point that both knowledge systems are integral and they both serve a very important purpose. I wouldn't dismiss one or the other. I'm grateful for both. But I would say that understanding the indigenous worldviews has taken me much longer. It's a much slower process. And it's a process that involves relationship with place and people. And so it's more complex. It was much easier for me to just, go to my office with my computer and analyze data. That was an easier endeavor, much as it might seem a harder endeavor. I think once you learn the tools, it is much easier. But I would say that you're absolutely right that I have gained a tremendous respect for tradition. And now I shift even my language. I try not to say, myth or superstition. It's more origin stories, cultural protocols, just to give more respect to the legacy of knowledge that has been passed on from generation to generation that serves the community very well. But sometimes, of course, there will be knowledge that I don't recognize as science or as scientific. And so I just observe it. I observe that. I don't try to correct people. I don't think that is my place. So I just observe it, and I just say, for example, when it came to eclipses, and especially lunar eclipses, there are many cultural protocols with eclipses in which people will actually not look at them, will not go out and look at an eclipse. When we went to the Navajo country, we had to be very respectful of the cultural protocols because Navajos do not look at a solar eclipse. And so we couldn't overlay our own expectations of observing the eclipse, even with glasses or with proper protection or whatever, because it was up to them whether they would observe it or not. And so we worked with Navajo knowledge holders, and we provided them with a trailer, a very well-appointed trailer, so that during totality they could remove themselves from the webcast if so they desired, which they did. And so we work with them to navigate their cultural protocols and respect whatever they're doing. And it's not to say, oh, how silly of you, or you're missing out, or, that would be so completely inappropriate for us to do that. But it was such a great learning process for us to understand also that many of their cultural protocols were based on actual knowledge that to look at a solar eclipse with the unaided eye can actually be dangerous to your sight, which is what the elders said. And so many of these traditions, if you look deeply enough and you research them through relationship, you will find that there are scientific underpinnings to those traditions many times. And of course, there's many other things as well, which is, like in Mesoamerica, pregnant women will not look at a lunar eclipse, will not go out, and they protect themselves wearing something red. It's essential to wear something red. So that's that. So my job is to say, this is what an eclipse is from an astronomical perspective. That is where my job begins and ends. And so that has been really helpful. And they appreciate my knowledge that I'm able to share with them, and I appreciate their perspective as well. Thanks for sharing.
I'll assume that's the end of questions, but by all means, stick around, talk.
Absolutely.
So glad we are here. You want to thank you so much. SFAA. And looking forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
Feel free to come and look around.